on the News Channel 5 network. This is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. Very good show tonight. Important show. We are talking about a significant change to TennCare. TennCare is, of course, the way that a large number of Tennesseans, 1 out of every 5 Tennesseans, get health insurance. There is a proposal to change it with a block grant, and it's gotten a lot of attention. There are some that are quite upset about that. There's some that think it's a good idea. So we're going to try and break it down tonight. It affects a lot of people. It may affect you. This is a chance for you to call in with your questions and a chance for all of us to get a better idea of what is being proposed here. And we are happy to have with us Mandy Pellegrin, the policy director of the Sycamore Institute. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And as we establish this, we need to know your perspective. So the Sycamore Institute, it says, is an independent, nonpartisan public policy research center for Tennessee. Do you have an opinion about this block grant proposal?
So our approach is that we take a neutral and objective approach to analyzing public policy issues. We actually have a bipartisan staff and a bipartisan board, so if we wanted to take a position on policy issues, more than likely we wouldn't even be able to come to an agreement. We really view our role as not taking a side, but providing information in an unbiased way so that you can sort of bring your own values and your own political perspective to it. So understand the data, understand the evidence behind what's going on, so that you can then make an informed decision sort of with your own perspective.
You've really dug deeply into this, and it is complicated. Is this the only issue that you're focused on, or are there other issues that you're providing information on?
So we focus on a lot of issues. We're really focused on the health and prosperity of Tennesseans, which kind of touches everything. Most of our work falls into a couple of buckets. We've done a lot of work on the state budget, a lot of work on health, and we kind of define health broadly, not just health care, but all the things in your life that impact your health outcomes. And then we do a lot on economic prosperity too, and we know that all of these things sort of interact with each other. The TennCare block grant proposal is a really great example of something that impacts both health and the state budget. So it's a really good example of the kind of work that we do. So
you are not for it, and you're not against it.
That's exactly right.
You're not for it, you're not against it. Okay. So break this down. This block grant proposal, how is it going to be a big change? What is the biggest thing that people need to be aware of with this?
So TennCare is the state's Medicaid program, which is generally a program that provides health insurance coverage to people with low incomes, individuals with disabilities, and it's a state-federal partnership. So the federal government has a lot of rules in place around what states must cover, who they must cover, and then in exchange, they pay for a big chunk of it. So in Tennessee, they pay for about 65% of everything that we spend on TennCare. There's some flexibility built into the program around the edges that provide the flexibility to add different benefits or add more people onto the program to tailor the benefits, and that's usually done through what's called a waiver process, where you're waiving certain federal rules or you're taking advantage of certain federal options, and you go through this waiver process. TennCare is already under a waiver, so we're already waiving some of those federal rules to, for example, use managed care companies, so health insurance companies, to manage the benefit for people. So the state doesn't really run the day-to-day insurance operation. That's done by private health insurance companies. So that's an example of how we've used flexibility that's already built into the law. So what the block grant proposal does is it really sort of builds on some of those flexibility concepts, and it asks for a lot more flexibility in the program and to be able to tap those flexibilities without asking the federal government for permission to do that first. It also reforms the way that the program is financed. So now, you know, we spend $1, we get $2 from the federal government is pretty much how it works out. There's some more details in there that I'm sure we'll get around to a little bit later. But for the most part, that's how it works. And we're asking, okay, let's sort of replace that matching system with this defined federal amount of money that we can draw down whether or not we sort of spend that dollar or not, although there are some maintenance of effort requirements built in. I'm sort of oversimplifying here at the beginning.
Right, that's good.
Right, and so if we spend less than that amount, we would get to share in those savings between sort of what this allotment is and what we actually spent, and we get to use those federal dollars without having to kind of pitch in our own match. And we'd get to maybe use them on extra things, new things that we're not doing today.
So we get a pot of money right now from the federal government, and with that money come strings. There's strings attached.
That's exactly right.
They require that we cover certain individuals or do certain things with that money.
That's right.
Now we're going to ask for a pot of money from the federal government, and there won't be strings.
There will be fewer strings. There will still be strings, many, many strings. So I would say that the flexibilities that they're asking for really fit into three buckets. One is tapping flexibilities that are sort of already available to us in federal law, but being able to tap those flexibilities without asking for permission first or filing the paperwork with the federal government. The second is asking for flexibilities that we actually really don't even have access in any way to today. So an example of that is TennCare is asking, for example, to use a formulary in the prescription drug benefit. So most of us that have private health insurance, we have some kind of formulary where we're only allowed to take certain drugs within certain classes. That's not really how the prescription drug benefit works today within the TennCare program, and they're asking to be able to do that because TennCare thinks, if it had that power, then it would have some leverage in negotiations with the pharmaceutical companies, and they may be able to bring down some of those costs. And then the sort of third bucket of flexibilities are really asking for exemptions from federal oversight. There's a lot of regulations around how managed care companies have to do things when they are managing a Medicaid benefit, and TennCare is asking for flexibility to sort of not have to do those things, not have to file certain types of paperwork with the federal government or get certain things approved.
I would think if Tennessee wants to do this is a proposal by Governor Lee, that it's going to save money. And when you start talking about saving money with health care, it means fewer people are covered. Seems like the bottom line.
Right.
Are fewer people covered?
No, not the way that it is written. So the term savings in this proposal is sort of interesting. It's not savings in the traditional sense. So I talked about how we're under a waiver already in the TennCare program. And basically, under a waiver, this is just how the rules are set up today. If a state wants to operate under a waiver, waive any of these existing rules to do new things or do things in a different way, they have to meet what is called a budget neutrality test. And that means it can't cost the federal government any more money than it thought it might have spent if we didn't have that waiver in place. So they create sort of this baseline projection of what TennCare might have cost if we didn't have that waiver in place, and we can't exceed that. So in a lot of ways, we're sort of already capped. Our funding is already capped. Well, for many, many years, we have been well under that sort of projected without waiver cap. And so what TennCare is asking to do is, okay, continue to hold us to that same standard. We've done a good job of staying under that cap. And let us partake in those savings. We're creating savings for you. That difference between what you think we might spend if we didn't have a waiver and what we've been spending, those are savings accruing to the federal government, and we're not really being rewarded for that. So let's split them. So give us half of it. So it's not really savings compared to what we're spending today. It's not even really savings compared to what we are expected to spend in the future. It's savings relative to this federal baseline of what we might have spent if we didn't have a waiver in place. So the bottom line is we would probably get more money under the proposal as it's written right now than we would without the proposal.
So that sounds good. I mean, okay, so as I understand it, we get 65%, so TennCare right now is funded 65% federal government, 35% state.
That's
is
right.
That right? 65-35. What does this do? What is the percentage now?
It would be hard to say that because you'd have to be projecting into the future and what that might be. I mean, I've heard some numbers, thrown around that say this deal had been in place this last year. We could have maybe tapped around $1 billion in additional funding from the federal government.
Which means we would have spent zero. So right now it's 65-35.
So we would spend the same that we were spending, but then we'd get an extra $1 billion. So that would bring the proportion, I don't know exactly what the proportion would be, but it would be more than 65% from the federal government. So our share would come down, their share would come up because we'd be getting more money from the federal government.
So we would spend 65%. Or the federal government would give us 65%. We would still contribute 35%. And then why do we get $1 billion? The federal government gives us another $1 billion? Is that right?
Well, so I have a graphic, but I'm not sure if it would work well on the television screen, but I'll try to hold it up here as steady as I possibly can there.
Okay.
So kind of this is how it works today. You have this federal baseline that I'm talking about, this without waiver spending. That's that dotted line on top. So this is like what the federal government thinks we might spend if we didn't have the waiver that we already have in place. And this is what we're actually spending. So all this difference is hypothetical federal savings that we're producing for the federal government because we have this waiver in place and because we manage the program the way that we do. And so they're proposing that moving forward, actually, this line would probably stay about the same, on the same trajectory. If our spending stayed on the same trajectory, we're asking to share that difference.
Okay.
Yeah. So don't get caught up too much on those percentages.
Okay.
It's a little too much math there.
So we don't use all the money that we are allowed to use, is what you're saying. They say they project that we're going to spend this amount of money, and we come in well under that.
That's right, yeah.
Now, I look at healthcare in Tennessee, and I ask the question, why aren't we spending all of that? Why don't we spend it? There are people that are desperately in need of healthcare.
So this is calculated on a per person basis. It's a whole complicated formula, but it's on a per person basis, and you multiply it and you add it and you get this aggregate amount. So it's not like it's money that's just sitting there really untapped. I mean, we're still having to spend our dollar to get those $2. So it's not just a pot of money that we can come up with things to spend on it. It's just, it is structured as an entitlement. So folks are accessing their benefit in the way that you and I access our health care. Tennessee's paying its dollar and we're getting the $2. Think of it as more of a drawdown situation than a pot of money that's sitting there.
Okay. All right. Now,
is
the
it clear as mud for you?
Well, there's a lot here. That's why this is complicated, but it's very important.
Yeah.
The plan would give Tennessee policymakers unprecedented control over changes to optional program benefits and provider payments without federal approval or oversight. So Tennessee policymakers could make major changes to TennCare. That's right.
So we can already make major changes to TennCare, but we have to go through a pretty lengthy this waiver process that I've been talking about. So we go through this process where it's fairly transparent up front what's required. You like what's actually going on with this proposal. The proposal goes up for public comment. TennCare addresses those comments. They submit it to the federal government. The federal government looks at it. They post it. They get public comments, and then everything goes a little bit dark for the public at that point. There's a lot of negotiation that goes on between the federal government and the state. A lot of that the public doesn't see. It can take a long time. A lot of waivers take a year, sometimes 2, to get approval. And TennCare would argue that in a lot of those situations, the changes really aren't that substantive. It's just a lot of time and energy that they feel like could be spent actually implementing the program or testing out innovative approaches, to borrow some of the language that they might use. So they're asking, well, let us do some of these things, but without having to go through that federal process. On the other side of that issue, there are folks that would argue that that process is in place for a reason. The federal government is picking up the lion's share, and they should get a say, and that ensures some level of transparency, it ensures some level of oversight, and that those things should remain in place. And that if you take those things away, then how are people going to know what's going on? How are they going to have an opportunity to provide feedback, especially the people that are in the program that are impacted by these changes?
Could state lawmakers then, they hit tough budget times, and could they say we need to get savings just to pay our bills, and we're going to take it out of this chunk of money. We're going to insure fewer people, or it's going to harm people in some way. So we have this block of money, and we're going to take it and not use it to insure people. We're going to use it to pay this bill over here.
I mean, there are certainly some questions about the way that it is drafted right now. I think that there's a little bit of a gap right now when TennCare talks about what they want to do with what really could be done. And I think that's scaring a lot of people. The flexibilities in this are very broad, and the way that it talks about being able to use those savings isn't very specific. So while the proposal itself and the public comments talk a lot about using these funds to do more for TennCare enrollees, to potentially even in the future expand eligibility for the program, to innovate in new ways and experiment and really just add on to the program, the fact of the matter is that the flexibilities are written so broadly that there are a lot of things that potentially could be done with the flexibilities and with the funding that could take away. So I think that's why we're seeing, there was a hearing last week in the legislature where we heard from the director of TennCare and we heard from other stakeholders, and people talked about, we understand your intent here, but we really need to see more assurances in the language. We just need more specifics in the language. And we heard the director of TennCare come back and promise some of those assurances in a couple of very specific areas. So I think we'll have to see after the public comment period ended, which it ended a couple of weeks ago. We'll have to see how TennCare responds to that and what they provide to the federal government.
So if somebody out there right now is on TennCare, they should be watching this, right? Yeah. Should they be concerned by this?
I think it's certainly fair to have concerns. This gap between the intent and the possibility, it is really important because whatever the intent of policymakers might be today, if we ask for those flexibilities, then those flexibilities exist for policymakers tomorrow. And we don't know what the intentions of those policymakers are. Now, I will say that we are asking to do this under the waiver authority, which is really agreement between the state and the federal government at an administrative level. A lot of the block grant stuff that got talked about a few years ago, those were fundamental changes in federal law that were very permanent. This is a temporary agreement, so there is still a level of federal oversight there. There is still this agreement between the state and the federal government where they, either one of them could come back to the table at any time and say, this agreement is not working the way that we thought it was going to. When you look at this proposal, it's not a great deal for the federal government at this time, but it's possible that it might be palatable to the folks that are making the decisions right now.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. That's very interesting. All right. We've gone a little long. All right. So we're going to take a break. Birdie, others on the line, hold on. If you want to call in, please do so. Ask any question you'd like. There's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.